Welcome to Grow Her Wings, a podcast by the Lutte Project, a 501c3 based in Jacksonville, Florida, with a mission to connect girls to aviation. We are your hosts, Jenn and Carrie, and we invite you to join us as we meet new people, talk to old friends, and learn new lessons on the path to inspire more of us to grow our wings. Welcome to Grow Her Wings, a podcast brought to you by the Lutte Project, a 501c3 based in Jacksonville, Florida, with a mission to connect girls to aviation. We're your hosts, Carrie and Jenn. I am dialing in from Anchorage, Alaska today, and Jenn out in Jacksonville, Florida. And we have a special guest with us today. Jenn, who do we have today?
Well, Dr. Becky Lutte. Am I saying your last name correctly?
Actually, it's Lutte.
Lutte. Dr. Becky Lutte. Those are things like details we should work out before the podcast. And Becky, where are you joining us from today?
I actually work from my home on the north side of Houston, Texas.
Awesome.
Oh, nice.
And Carrie, the way we came across Dr. Lutte and her work and some of the things that she does is through Claudia Zapata, when we had her on for a podcast a few weeks ago when you had COVID-19.
Coronavirus. Yes. I was sorry to miss that because I went back and I watched that 3 or 4 times, partly because of her video and then the rest of her story and then just the great conversation you guys had.
Yeah, it was fantastic. She really recommended we have Becky on the show because of her research and work that she's done. And Dr. Lutte, would you mind kind of sharing some of the stuff that you've done and who you've been working with?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My regular job is as an associate professor at the University of Nebraska at Omaha Aviation Institute. So as a part of that role, I teach, of course, but also do research. And in particular, my real passion is doing research in the area of outreach, recruitment, and retention of women in aviation. So that's some of the work that I know Claudia had mentioned to you. I'm a big fan of Claudia and all that she is doing on the outreach efforts for women in aviation as well. So yeah, so I can speak to any of those that you want to hear a little bit more about.
And that was a special commission from the FAA, is that correct? That some of your work is based off of?
So the research itself is done primarily in partnership with Women in Aviation International, and some of it has been funded by the Nebraska NASA Space Grant. And that included research like the Women in Aviation Workforce Report, which I can talk more about. But the goal of that report really was to try to, first of all, when we talk about trying to move the needle, right? We're all talking about trying to move the needle for women in aviation. And so the point of that first big project with the workforce report is where are the greatest gaps? So where are the biggest gender gaps in aviation? And so that was kind of a deep dive into the data to try to figure out some of the data points. Some of them are easier to find than others. We've got FAA data out there that's fairly easy to get hold of, but some of the other data points are a little more challenging. So that was the purpose of that report, is to start with where are the gaps so we know how to target outreach and recruitment and additional retention concerns. So that project was done in association again with Women in Aviation and then the Nebraska, NASA Nebraska Space Grant. So I can talk a little bit more about those gap areas. What that report found was that women are, of course, women are significantly underrepresented in aviation, in the industry overall. And that even though we make up about half the workforce in the US, women make up a very small portion in many of the career fields in aviation. And the areas that have the greatest gap are actually leadership positions and the technical operations areas of pilots and maintenance technicians.
Yeah, and you've mentioned, I think in your report that it was maintenance has the largest or the smallest percentage, right?
Right, that is the greatest single gender gap area in all the workforce areas that are listed in that report. So women in maintenance, there are only 2.4% maintenance technicians that are women. So we're talking a really small percentage. So we have a lot of work to do in that area.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I know one of the groups that I've come across recently that I've enjoyed, partly through my Women in Aviation chapter in Central Florida, is Chicks Fix with United Airlines.
I love that group.
Those guys.
I'm so excited about that group. I think they're doing wonderful things. I love the photos. I love the outreach and the attention. Yeah, I agree. And I get really excited about campaigns like that because I think one of the things, you know, as I mentioned, I do research in the area of outreach and what good outreach should look like. And in addition to things like awareness about the field, one of the things I think I've really come to believe is that in addition to awareness, we've got to have a level of empowerment in outreach. So it's not just, you know, presenting to young women that these are the opportunities that are out there for them, but they really need to believe that this is within their reach and something that they really can do. And so that see it, be it part of it, you know, seeing somebody that looks like them in those kinds of positions, I really think goes a long way for the empowerment. So I love the Chicks Fix for that. There's a lot of great organizations out there doing some interesting work. And but yes, I hope we can get that needle moved in particular.
Yeah, I think you.
Yes, that is a lot.
I think you talked a little bit, Dr. Lutte, about also the consistency of contact with some of these girls. Could you talk a little bit more about like the age range and maybe some of the things that you found have been efficient or beneficial to those girls getting into aviation career fields?
Sure. A couple of things you said there. The age group for sure. The EAA Women's Soar just did an additional survey on women in aviation with over 3,000 respondents. And one of the things I was excited that came out of that research was the age group information. So one of the things they asked women in aviation was, what age did you become interested? And the primary age for sure is under the age of 20. It was something like over 60% of the women became interested in aviation under the age of 20. And the biggest age group was younger than 10. So I was really excited to see that data. I get really excited about that kind of stuff, but excited to see that in part because it helps inform us, like you said, where should we target that outreach? So where do we need to think about putting our efforts and resources, quite frankly, in order to really, you know, capture more young women in aviation? And what we know now is, you know, we've got to start early. And to your other point, you got to do it often. You know, you talked about consistency. And so part of that is having all kinds of different outreach activities for young women. But also a big important part of outreach to me is what I would call sustaining the momentum. So, you know, we go out and we do these there's so many great programs. Girls in Aviation Day. The 99s do great programs. OBAP is launching Girls Launch this month. I'm so excited about that. And an important part of that is, you know, we have these events, we get them really excited about aviation, and we want to make sure we give them pathway information as a part of that experience to sustain that momentum, or as you were saying, give some consistency to what we're doing so that we can keep them engaged and keep them involved, and they know what to do next so they can start to pursue their dreams in aviation.
Well, speaking of dreams in aviation, you're more than a researcher. You grew up in aviation, correct?
I did. I really did. I think
you're a pilot.
I am a pilot. I started in aviation, then went into academia. So, and I think I got the bug being an Air Force brat. So I grew up in and around, you know, Air Force bases, and just always felt at home at the airport. Still do. It's still one of my, I mean, I'm in my home office now, but my hangar is about my second favorite place to be. So I still feel very comfortable. I love the community there. So I am a pilot. I started flying my freshman year of college with the absolute goal that I was going to be an airline pilot. I knew it for sure. And I've done all kinds of jobs in aviation. I've worked the ramp, you know, thrown bags, de-iced airplanes. I know what that's like in the wind. Wow. How hard that is to wash out of your hair, all those things. And I did. I continued on and got all my ratings with the anticipation of again, going to the airlines. And then I kind of stumbled across higher education in sort of an unusual way. I was in my hometown of Omaha at the university, and they were starting up this new aviation program at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. So I walked in literally like just curious because it was my hometown, and like to get a brochure or something. And the director that was there actually came out and had a big conversation with me about the program, what they were doing, how they were looking for people to teach classes. And he was so engaging. Bill Shea was his name, wonderful person. great mentor. And he was so engaging that he actually talked me into teaching a class. And that kind of sparked a whole new area. I ended up, shifting gears and found out that I love this whole new area of aviation I didn't even know about. So it was interesting because, you just never know what's out there in this field. And I think it's really important to kind of be ready to divert and take advantage sometimes of some of the things that come up. But luckily, yes, I still fly. I'm still a very active pilot. Now I'm an aircraft owner and CFI, II, commercial multi. We have a RV-7 experimental aircraft, a little tailwheel. It's great fun and still love it. So still very active, yeah.
Carrie, do you have your tailwheel rating?
I do. I do. I had the most enjoyment, I would say, first would be learning to land on floats on the water on purpose.
Oh, I'm jealous. On purpose.
And then because I remember my first landing, I was like, I am landing on the water on purpose. This is my intended landing zone. This is phenomenal. And I would say second, only by a fraction, would be learning to fly. I got my tailwheel endorsement, in 2007. And that was just eye-opening for me. You think you know how to fly an airplane.
Yes.
Then
all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, I really have to use my feet like all the time.
Yes. See, Jen, you would be a natural.
I learned so much from it. I agree totally. Yeah, I loved it.
Yes. Jen, you would be a natural. Helicopter pilots are used to having to fly with their feet.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and I do land on my tailwheel, and I do have to balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
But I don't know. After my last fixed wing landing, maybe.
Oh, we all have those. You should have seen my last tailwheel landing like 3 days ago. So I'm with you. We all get there.
Right. I've had a few where I've had to think in my head, welcome aboard, as if I just landed on a carrier.
We all
I just I blame it on my height.
Right. So that's all of your experiences. I mean, that's a diverse background and portfolio you kind of explained there. What are some of your favorite memories? Like one or two things that you just really enjoyed that were unique to what you did?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I mean, when it comes to the flying side, I think everybody's probably one of the greatest memories is the first solo, which I still remember very well. It's quite a long time ago, of course, but just that feeling of being out there with Claude, my instructor, who was wonderful, and then him getting out of the airplane. I just remember the joy of taking off, and I will never forget being, partway on downwind on that first landing. You're like, all right, now I got to get this back down. And how much fun it was and how enjoyable it was. And I think now, fast forward, I would have never guessed then that, how important it was for things like keeping your CFI current, because who knew I would end up having, I wasn't thinking forward to family and kids. And so now my greatest memories are flying with the family. My husband's a pilot. My son is in flight training right now. My other son enjoys going as well. So I'd have to say anytime that the four of us are in an airplane together, I'm pretty happy.
That's pretty great. That's one thing that I've mentioned before too. And Jen gets much more of an option to do or opportunity to do this lately, but it's great taking other people flying and kind of sharing that first experience. And I like catching a look at their face when you first lift off the ground. Especially, exactly. I mean, if you've flown on an airliner, you think, oh, I've flown in an airplane before. But when you're in a little airplane, act a set of controls, even if you're not the one flying for that first takeoff. So that's
and I love working with kids, especially. I'm really active with our EAA group here, and I'm a big fan of the Young Eagles. In fact, the outreach professor researcher of me will tell you that all the reasons why that's a best practice for aviation youth outreach. But the other side of me just loves being on the ramp and working with the kids at Young Eagles. And whenever there are young girls or young women that are there, of course, I go right over to them and talk to them all about, you can do it, and I do it, you can do it. And to have those conversations with them is just fantastic.
Well, I think that's a big part of it. You alluded to that, or you said that earlier, the see it, be it idea. So that helps. It's, it's there. I grew up with a very positive influence in my parents telling me I could be anything I wanted. But it wasn't until I went to Oshkosh and saw Patty Wagstaff that I actually knew I was going to do it. Like, okay, thank you for the support, Mom and Dad, but now I've just seen her. Now I know I can do it. So simply taking that time out of your busy schedule to do the Young Eagle events, or to go meet and talk and search out those young girls. Because I think in your research, I was looking, you talked about influencers.
Exactly.
That being a big part.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, that got me thinking about the influencers as well, because
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the things that, so the workforce report was about where is the gaps. And then the second
Mm-hmm.
piece was the Women in Aviation survey. And that was a survey of over 1,100 women to find out what draws them into aviation, what keeps them from aviation, what's deterring them, and things like you mentioned in terms of the influencers. And so some of the interesting information that came out about the influencers was, first of all, as you mentioned, parents are a big influence. So many women, over 50% of women said parents were a positive influence for them to pursue aviation as a career. So first of all, yay parents. It's nice to know that we still have an influence. And it was for me as well. I mean, I can remember going to my dad. I was an engineering student, a freshman in college, and I went to my dad, and who, of course, Air Force person. And I said, I really think this is something I want to do. And he immediately had like a spreadsheet of all the university programs, and he went down to the Aero Club at Offutt and picked out my instructor and said, go fly with this person. And he was just super supportive. So the influencers part's a big piece. So parents are a big part of the influencers. One of the other things that I think is interesting on influencers, and this probably won't shock you guys, it was the high school counselor issue, right? So high school counselors are not only not an influence, but when they are an influence, the research shows it's more negative than it is positive. So they're more likely to potentially turn somebody away or turn somebody off for women in aviation. And that is certainly not a knock on high school counselors. I think they have a big job to do. I think it's on us. I think one of the things that teaches us about outreach is we don't just need to do outreach to young women. We need to do outreach to influencers. So do the high school counselors have the proper information? Do the parents, for that matter, have the proper information about, all the different avenues? Of course, I know the university angle the best because that's where I work, but there's many pathways to whatever career field there is. So how well do we do an outreach to inform the influencers for the young people that are coming in? I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, and I can see that also being beneficial about not just who the outreach is for, but where.
Exactly.
So perhaps if there's an opportunity, I know in a world now with COVID, with so many things being virtual, but that kind of increases our opportunity to influence, because more and more places are looking for avenues to dial into to get information. But once we get more things figured out, we get to do more in person. The looking at, the grade schools and junior highs and high schools, of finding the way to participate in those already existing forums that they have for colleges. Because I know colleges, I remember all the colleges coming to visit in high school. And then I remember the Air Force recruiter, but he wasn't there to talk to me about becoming a pilot.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, finding out the where for that influence as well, for that outreach.
Yeah, exactly. And quite frankly, in some cases, with the parents as the influencers in the college and other areas, they're the ones that ultimately are paying tuition. Yeah. So it's important that oftentimes, not always, obviously there's a lot of different models, but it's important that we get people the right information and make the right investments. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've learned, Carrie, is that dads are huge in this whole arena.
Yeah.
Dads and just say, hey, I really want my daughter to learn more about this.
Yeah. And I would even take that a step further. The research showed from the survey that not just dads as influencers, but in the mentor survey research, it actually shows that male mentors are a bigger influence and a bigger factor than women mentors to other women in aviation. And I think part of that is simply because there aren't as many women in aviation to be mentors. But I think it raises, to your point, a really important point, and that is we talk a lot about women supporting women and see it be it, but it's extremely important to recognize the men who are mentors and allies and sponsors, and that's a huge role. So that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, that's what's creating that environment, because you were talking about not only how do we want people to be, encourage women and young girls to be involved, but how do we retain them? And it's that environment, because there's a perceived, the perceived existence of, I don't necessarily belong here. It's a male majority environment, but when those individuals reach out and mentor and encourage and instruct you, really part of supporting that positive environment. Yeah, I agree.
I think that's such an important point that you just made, because again, me, I'm going to go back to data all the time because that's how I roll. But it's, and you're right. I mean, for the retention and recruitment of women, the survey showed that the workplace culture, that male-dominated culture bias that exists in the workplace culture, is absolutely a deterrent to the recruitment and retention of women. It's just a fact. The data shows that that's what it is. So you're exactly right. I mean, it's got to be a matter of changing the work. If we want to, one, keep the women that are already there, and two, increase the numbers, we've got to create a workplace that works for everybody, right? So to your point, I mean, both men and women play a really big role in that. I mean, I'm sure, I would imagine, as both former and current, Air Force pilots, first of all, thank you both very much for your service. But, we've all seen that workplace culture or had to deal with it at some level. I say we all, but the majority of women in aviation have had some kind of an experience in that regard. So you all know it better than I do, probably.
Well, I was just having a conversation. It was interesting last night with a colleague of mine, not in aviation, but she was talking about how the females in the unit were being called super critical, or that they spoke up too much, or they were a bad word, that's sort of the B, right? Because they were always saying negative things, but they were really speaking up about issues that were happening in the squadron that the guys were not speaking up about. And so, I advised the person that was talking to me about it and just said, hey, why don't you just say to the guys, like, you guys are really lucky that you have women in the squadron that are speaking up, because you guys aren't. So, you just kind of turn it around and turn it maybe into something positive. Carrie about language often, and just the way that we frame things and how that makes a difference.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely does. And I think that's a good description right there of exactly, what we're talking about in terms of the struggles sometimes with the workplace culture. And we can do it. We do it. I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. When you're the one woman in the room, or on the flight deck, or in the squadron, or whatever your scenario is, and you do have to speak up. But you're right. It is so nice when you also have an ally, and one of the male counterparts also supports that. And that's also really helpful to change the culture, because it's really going to take everybody to make that shift.
And I don't think that it's just men. I mean, I think that it's just the majority based. I was in a room the other day with two female two-star major generals, and there was one guy in the room, and he was a lieutenant colonel like me, and I kind of felt bad for him, because I was like, if he speaks up, like, he's against the majority, he's against the groupthink. And I don't think that it's necessarily male versus female. It's just what has been versus new people and new thought process.
Yeah, it's underrepresented. Whatever underrepresented means in that scenario, right? It's the same, basic issues. So that's a good point. And I do say, even though I talk a lot in the work about workplace culture and how we do need a shift, I always will also say that I think the industry is making strides in that area too. So there's a lot of investment happening. There's a lot of attention happening. There's a lot of momentum right now. You mentioned the FAA. I am a member of the FAA Women in Aviation Advisory Board. And I think that that's a good indication of this kind of shift and all the momentum that is behind, diversity inclusion work right now. So I'm excited about that. And I think we need to, focus on the positive as well. So, yeah.
Agreed. It's one of those where we look at the message that we're trying to present in order to encourage, yet finding the correct language to not use it to only show what we don't have, or what we didn't have, because we have so much. There is so much opportunity out there. There are so many organizations. There are so many scholarship opportunities focused on helping with this recruitment and retention that you're studying right here. So I look at it as, the three of us and other individuals that are working towards this goal of the importance of that message that we put out, of showing all those positive things to go, we understand there's negatives out there, but look at everything else you gain.
That is,
and
you could be the outreach program right there. I love that. And it's so true. And I think that's exactly it. And I think we need to be, open about kind of some of the issues that are deterrents so that we can address them for sure. But I completely agree. I mean, I think the message also needs to be all the great parts of aviation, because what we know from the survey also is that what draws women into aviation is the fun aspect, that it's a fun career field, the passion for aviation, that it's an adventurous career, the desire to prove our own abilities and be challenged. I mean, those were the primary factors that came out in the research of what draws women in, right? It wasn't money, it wasn't travel, it wasn't technical nature appealing, it wasn't, dare I say, the STEM stuff. It was really, all the things that you talked about. It's the fact that, when you have such a passion for the aviation, it's such a great place to work that right. It's the positive really is that it's a great field to be in. So I agree. Right.
That's funny. I have a picture that's up on our Instagram and on Facebook, and it's on my Facebook. I love it. But it's like 7 ballerinas in a row. And all of them are like, they've labeled them all based on their facial expressions, and it's like lawyer, doctor, they're all serious. And then you've got the one ballerina who's hanging upside down from the bar, and underneath her it says pilot. I mean,
right?
Yes. Yeah.
I can totally relate. We all can, right?
Challenge and adventure.
Right.
But what we've been talking about, it gets a lot to, we mentioned it before when we were speaking, and Jen and I talk about it a lot. It's not just the aviation as a career, it's everything else you get out of being around airplane people, of the skills that you learn when you learn to fly an airplane, or learn to fix an airplane, or be an aircraft dispatcher. Those are some of the aircraft dispatch and air traffic control are two of the jobs that when I think about it, it makes my head hurt just from the sheer number of things that they have to balance and fix, and all the different contingencies that are going through their head at the same time as they're directing something. So there's so much to be gained from this. There's so much that's challenging, and you're proving it. You're a pilot and you're a doctor.
Well, and it's been, such a great career field. And if you would have told me, 30 years ago when I got into aviation, that I would be doing what I'm doing now, this wasn't even on my radar. So to your point, there's so much out there, and a lot of us come into it because flight's what draws us in, or something very specific. But when you get into the field and you see all these different aspects and all these different options, it's just, it's really incredible.
There's so much out there.
There is. It's just a matter of being open and trying it. You don't know what you don't like till you try it. And then you don't know what you like till you get into it and give it a go. So there's a lot of interesting things out there to try.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, and I meant to talk about it, and I just want to circle back just for a minute about the EAA program and their Young Eagles program. I know it's kind of stifled a little bit because of COVID this year, but what is it about that program that you feel is the most effective, or what is the way that it's really reaching the most young people the best?
Yeah, one of the reasons I call EAA Young Eagles a best practice in aviation outreach, along with some others as well. But in particular, they do such an amazing job of knowing who they want to target. They have a very specific task that they do in terms of introducing them with the flight. So they've got a very focused purpose. They've got a targeted market. But in particular, the sustaining the momentum piece is very impressive with the Young Eagles. So they come in, they do that flight, they leave there with the code for free private pilot ground school. They leave also with opportunities for a first flight lesson. information about the EAA scholarship program for more flight training. And then just recently, in the last couple of weeks, they've announced that the EAA Young Eagles is now going to be partnered with or supported by the United Airlines Aviate program. So, I mean, when you talk about pathway, and they've really got that corner covered. So that's one of the things I'm impressed with them. But there's so many great programs. Obviously, Girls in Aviation Day, Women in Aviation, is just incredible. They went virtual this year, given the situation that they found themselves in, that we're all in, and really turned that into a positive. They ended up having a geographic reach that was 3 times anything that they had done in the past. I think they had 55 countries, girls from 55 countries participate. So it's examples like that of programs that are saying, here's what we're dealt with in terms of the cards. How do we make this work for us, and how do we expand that outreach? So there's a lot of great stuff going on.
Yeah, I know.
You make a good point. Oh, sorry about that. You make a good point about the Girls in Aviation going virtual this year. It kind of made us all think of different ways to do that. And that app removed a barrier to participation to a lot of young girls.
Right, exactly. It really helped expand that access.
Yeah, and the continued access again, right? Like it just continued it, so.
Right, that'll be an ongoing app for them. So great opportunities now to, even when we are back in person, to learn from what we've, accomplished during COVID with all these organizations, and how do we now, add that in to the mix of what we've already been doing in person to just keep that outreach going and keep those efforts expanding.
And they were able to find a way to get everybody their swag. I just received
that was impressive.
Yep, still got my swag. Which is a big reason to go to those things too, right? Like there's just a lot of cool stuff you get when you go to a Girls in Aviation Day, wherever it is in the country. So I am really coming up
right. And another good example of that, using the swag and, adjusting on the fly, no pun intended, is the EAA, Women Venture group. They couldn't have Women Venture, obviously, this year and all the events. So they turned that into an opportunity and did that Women Soar survey. And as a part of the survey, if you completed the survey, then they sent you the Women Venture t-shirt. And so,
I got my t-shirt.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Yeah. So that really turned into an opportunity to get a lot of great data, which I think is going to help this conversation even more. And I got my t-shirts. Yeah. So it's all good.
Yeah. Some words. You didn't tell me about it.
I was traveling. It's my freight brain. I can't remember what day it is half the time.
Freight brain. I love it.
Too many time zones.
That's another thing that I really want to kind of hit on real quick before we start wrapping up. But I know that the commercial airline industry right now is kind of they're in an unknown. They don't know what's happening, and I know there's a lot of congressional bill didn't pass to support them, but freight airlines are still doing great, right? Like somebody has to deliver the packages, as well as I think charter really is going to probably get into this as well.
Right. Yeah. Charter. I've seen a lot of, there's a few I've been noticing. I follow a few websites that talk about startups, and there's some aviation startups. There's a few companies trying to create like the Uber for aviation sort of thing. So looking at that gap now, there's pilots with airplanes necessarily not working. How do we capitalize on that?
Well, the FAA just passed the new rule in October that there was a company that was trying to do an Uber for aviation, and they got big.
Yeah.
So we're not advocating for that.
No.
Check
no,
with your though, right? That's our disclaimer.
Yeah. No, but it's opening. Well, the people I'm following on here, they're not actually operating yet. They're trying to build this, or trying to find a way to grow aviation in a way that it hasn't been grown before. So so charter's doing well. I'm sure I know freight, FedEx and UPS are still hiring, and I'm sure everyone that works, other agencies with them are. It's been busy.
And I have a question for you, actually, Carrie, because this is along those notes. You might not be seeing this as much at UPS and probably not with the cargo airlines, but one of the concerns that I have of the kind of unexpected consequence of COVID in terms of women in aviation is the concern that pilots that are furloughed, because there's been a this push towards diversity, are going to be a little bit disproportionately heavier towards women. And there was an article in Reuters out recently that talked about that, and that women will potentially be more likely to take the early out, the early retirement, and that may be disproportionately more women. So there's some concern that actually one of the consequences of COVID is that, given the furloughs and everything and the early out options, that when we come back after COVID, the 5% airline pilots and the just over 1% airline captains that are women, those numbers we talk about a lot, may actually be lower post-COVID.
Right, because the captains might be retiring with the early out. I'd be interested to see, I want to read that Reuters article about how the furloughs, because furloughs are all seniority based.
Right.
So in a way, I could see how you could draw that, because most of our hiring has been more recent. So as far as getting involved in commercial aviation, so it could disproportionately target all those gains we've made with the outreach in the last few years.
But UPS, right, just hired her name is escaping me, the young lady who started Sisters of the Skies, right? Like,
yes, one of the co-founders of Sisters of the Skies. She's a Coast Guard pilot, and they've just hired her. Looking forward to seeing her. I keep looking at, I swing by the training center every time I'm through Louisville, hoping I could see her going through with her INDOC class to say hello.
And another great program, obviously, especially on that be it outreach and empowerment. I mean, Sisters of the Skies is just a phenomenal program or organization. So, OBAP, a lot of great organizations doing that.
There's a lot of good stuff out there targeting for diversity, and I hope, as much as Malou, I love that we do this podcast. It's amazing, and we're really grateful that you're here with us, Becky. There's just so much out there potential to continue to encourage girls. It's the one flight, but then it's like the continued, like you talked about. And I think I have some ideas on how we want to help with that and see if we can't continue to grow these young ladies' interest in aviation, because it's there. It's definitely there.
Yes.
It is there. And I'm so grateful for your podcast and what you're doing and your work. It's fantastic. So I'm thrilled to even be invited to be a small part of it. But I love your podcast, and I think it's great. And you're right. It is out there. It is available. To Carrie's point too earlier, the scholarship money that's out there and the scholarship opportunities. Take the time, dig around, do the work, find the lists, and there's some great opportunities for funding for many underrepresented groups.
I almost feel bad sometimes, like when guys ask me, like, "Hey, how can I get a pilot's license?" And I'm like, "Ooh, it's not your time. I'm sorry." There's a lot of scholarships.
We have actually had one of our male students won one of the major scholarships at Women in Aviation International a few years back. So they do give scholarships to all kinds of different people.
I keep telling a lot of the guys too, when they talk about their sons looking like, oh yeah, but the cost, like, just keep looking at all those lists of scholarships, because some of them, they may be from a 99s or Women in Aviation or some other organization, but they're not all tied to that, I guess, the gender requirement. So there's money out there. Right. We have a lot of avenues right now because we're looking at more recruitment, but just got to dig. Like you said, you've got to dig and do the work and find the lists and apply. That's the big part.
Apply.
If I could count, I would be rich if I could get just a penny for the number of times somebody said, yeah, but so many people must apply for that, so I figure I'll look for another one.
As somebody
You're definitely not going to get it if you don't apply.
Well, and as somebody that sits on scholarship reviews and reviews the apps coming in, I can tell you would sometimes be shocked at the small number of applications that come in for some scholarships. So, and I think that's the biggest hurdle, is the self-doubt or the lack of just putting that application in. So yeah, we have one student who spent a summer researching scholarships and applied for, I think, over 30 scholarships, she said, in a relative, and she just killed it. I mean, she did great. But she took the time and did it. So it's like, you know, you're not going to get it if you don't apply. So
That's right. And you always know if you never even try.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
This has been
Absolutely. It's been good. So I guess in closing, Jen and I usually like to ask this, and thinking back on what we've discussed and your experience between the research side, flying, and being exposed to aviation at a younger age, what is some advice or that piece of advice you would give, whether it be to young girls or to their parents looking to pursue a career in aviation?
Yeah, well, to both, I would say keep your options open. Check out everything that you have an interest in. You know, if you can dream it, you can do it. And so if you have that interest, go for it, check it out, get the information, reach out to people like me and others who are happy to help you get that information. So that would be my information to both. To the girls specifically, you know, find your sisters, find your group. I'm a big fan of getting your community of support. Get that tight-knit group of women. Some of them are my pilot friends, some of them are my women who are not pilot friends, but that support you, have your back, you know, are going to be with you for your successes. They're going to, you know, help you through the failures. And as I always say, if you're doing it right, you're going to have failures. We all do. So that means you're really spreading your wings, so to speak. So find your girls, find your sisters, and stick with that community of support, and then just go for it.
I love that. You're not doing it right unless you have failures. Like, that is something that's so important for our youth today. Like, really need to hear that. You need to.
And we all do. We all do. We've all been there. So, and still do on occasion, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. I tell my nieces that all the time. It is okay to fail.
Yeah.
Just remember, it's okay.
Yeah, it's encouraged, quite frankly.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It means you're trying.
You learn so much from your failures.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah. Dr. Lutte, how could someone reach you if they wanted to?
Sure. The research that I've mentioned is on a website called ResearchGate, and it's under my name, which is under Rebecca Lutte. And then beyond that, probably just the University of Nebraska Omaha Aviation Institute site, I suppose, is where the rest of my bio information probably is. LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here and for listening in to our podcast and sharing information, sharing your story. We're grateful for all the women that get to be on this podcast and share their stories. So, Carrie, I don't know if anything else you want to say or ask before we depart.
No, just thank you. This is great.
Oh, thank you so much.
Conversation.
I had a ball. I enjoyed it very much.
Thanks
for what you're doing, and thanks for highlighting all these important issues. That's the key.
And hopefully in 3 years, it'll be a whole different conversation.
Let's hope. Thank you.